beginning a survey of all the Old Testament. And obviously where you start when you're doing a survey like that is in Genesis. And we're still in the early chapters of Genesis. I want to thank Wayne for teaching for me last week while I was out preaching in Fayetteville. And I understand that we are, if you're looking at your study guide, we are in lesson number 3. And we are actually ready to begin at chapter 12 of Genesis. So if you're looking at your study guide, we're in lesson 3. If you don't have that, don't worry. You can follow along with us in the Bible at Genesis chapter 12. So in Genesis chapter 12, beginning at verse 1, the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse them curse thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. All right, so we often reference Genesis 12, the first verses of Genesis 12, concerning the promise that God made to Abram. So he's going to take him to a land that would be an inheritance. He was going to make his descendants great. A great nation would come from him. And so we often refer to the land promise, the nation promise, and then the third promise, which obviously we think is absolutely the most significant, is in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed, which we believe is a prophetic promise about the Savior being born as a descendant of Abraham. So that's an important passage to remember for that reason. And we very often make reference to the threefold promise made to Abraham. So Abram had already left, at the end of chapter 11, they had already left from the Ur of Chaldees, and they had come to Haran. And then they left from Haran to go to the land of Canaan. We don't have a map that shows this, but if you can kind of picture it in your mind's eye. So we often refer to it as the Fertile Crescent. Go up the Euphrates River Valley and then over and down along the Mediterranean coast. And that area, if you can picture that in your mind's eye, so I brought a map out. If you can picture that in your mind's eye, that sort of Fertile Crescent area, that's where Abram had come from over in the Euphrates Valley region, Mesopotamia, and he had come up to the north, sort of the northern part of that arc in Haran, and now he's leaving Haran. This is not going to show it. He comes from Haran down into the land of Canaan, and so that's the process that he had already left Ur, and he was in Haran when God spoke to him this second time. But there's an indication that God had already spoken to him in Ur. And other places say he was called out of Ur. Notice there in chapter 12, verse 1, Now the Lord had said to Abram, Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, from thy father's house. So, he was called out of Ur, went as far as Haran and stayed for a time, and then from Haran on to the land of Canaan. But again, remember that threefold blessing that is mentioned there. So when Abram got to the land of Canaan, again, there's more the repetition of the promises. Verse 7, chapter 12, verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, Unto thy seed I will give this land. So a repeat about the land promise part of this. But verse 10 says, a famine arose, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. It came to pass, when he was come near to Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife. And they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, that thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen and asses and men servants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this thou hast done to me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why didst thou say, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold, thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. So this is a pretty well remembered episode in the history of Abram. So later this is not the only time that he pulls this trick, that he tells this sort of half-truth. And it's explained elsewhere that she, in fact, was a half-sister. Sarai, still at this time, was Abram's half-sister. Same father, different mothers. And so this was a half-truth. Now, we often make a point about this kind of conduct, the telling of half-truths. Abram clearly told that. Although it was true that she was a sister, or half-sister, he told that lie. He made that statement in order to deceive Pharaoh and Pharaoh's people. And so it wasn't completely untrue, but it was an act of deception that Abram was engaged in. And so we learned something from that. This was not right. I think you can clearly see that Abram was not right in this. And a lesson for us, sometimes we might get ourselves in sort of a tight spot, and we might be tempted to sort of stretch the truth, or maybe not tell all of the truth, or just to tell a half-truth. And maybe we console ourselves in the sense, well, it didn't come outright and lie. But if our intention was to deceive, then it's the same thing as lying. And you see that here plainly in the case of Abram, and we can learn from that. Thoughts or comments, Wayne?
Nature that Abraham expressed at this time. He was afraid for himself. He wasn't thinking about his wife or anything like that. Just, they might take you to kill me.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, this first 4 verses, I think, is probably one of the most pivotal verses or sections of Scripture. It's the second that I can remember. It's the second promise of a seed. The first one, Genesis 3:15. This one, Genesis 12.
Yeah. And it's really interesting that in these early chapters of Genesis, we're already seeing God referencing his eternal plan for the salvation of mankind. I think you're right. Another thing that I think we see here that's worth noting, Abraham is a great man. Abraham is a great man of faith. He's actually referenced as being the friend of God. But the thing that we see from this is that even this great man of faith had a moment of weakness, and he failed. He failed a test here, and so that's something for us to learn from. You're never so strong, but what you can't stumble. Abram here still stumbled, and so can we. And so that just tells us we need to constantly and always be on guard against that potential thing happening. Abraham is a true great man of faith, but he stumbled and he made a mistake. There's another thing that is often pointed out here about this that I think is worth noting too. The fact that one of the greatest men of the Bible, his mistake, his error, his sin, his weakness is exposed, is sort of a backdoor argument, sort of a subtle argument, if you will, as to the inspiration of the Scriptures. if the book was just written by men, if just human beings had written this without any intervention from God, you make your hero stand out strong. You don't portray them as weak or having failures. But the Bible is not written that way. The Bible exposes Abraham. It exposes King David. It exposes the Apostle Peter. Even men who were great heroes of faith, their weaknesses and failures are described. Men would not have written it that way. Men, when they write their books, their heroes are all perfect. Bible heroes are shown with, chinks in their armor. And that has often been pointed out. I think it's a worthy argument. It's a sort of a subtle sign of inspiration that is shown. Thoughts or comments, Wade?
The Quran is written where the heroes are unbreakable.
I don't know how I would compare it in that regard. I wouldn't compare them as being written at the same level, but I don't know what I would say about that argument in particular. Because the misdeeds of Muhammad are described in the Quran, but they're not described as misdeeds. Muhammad went out and slaughtered, armies of innocent people, but he's held up as a hero for doing that. He's not described as, well, that was bad, So it's a little different in that case. Wayne?
Yeah, these heroes, we often think of them as being greater than they are. We often kind of forget about their foibles, their mistakes, their sins, and just focus on the greatness of the work that they have done. But if you look at the sins that they commit, how exposed they are, it gives us a great deal of hope. Because, we think of ourselves as being sinful and them as being not.
Yeah.
They're just great.
Yeah.
Well, they have sins too,
Yeah.
just like we do. They're
Yeah.
ordinary men, just like we are.
Yeah.
Ordinary men that God chose for an extraordinary purpose.
Yeah, I think you're right, exactly right. Josh?
I'm not trying to get too far ahead, but I know with Israel being in the news and people, especially politicians, are like, well, the Bible is in favor of Israel, so we must be in favor of Israel too. And one of this promise was the land promise. I always think about this because it's brought up so much. But in Joshua 21, at the end of Joshua's life, he said in verse 43, the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he sware to give unto their fathers. They possessed it and dwelt therein. And verse 45 says, they failed not aught of any good thing which the Lord had spoken unto the house of Israel. All came to pass.
That is exactly right. And that, we would do well to have that passage maybe in the margin here. At Genesis 12, when the promise is first made, as Josh was saying, some people in our political world today say, well, you got to have a nation of Israel because the Lord made land promises all the way back to Abraham, and the land promises weren't fully fulfilled. So there must be a future time when those land promises will be fulfilled. And I'm going to tell you, that kind of reasoning is pretty pervasive in our political world, and it affects decisions, a lot of decisions that are made politically. But the reference that Josh mentioned in Joshua 21, verses 43 and 45, that just knocks that argument in the head. That's not true. The Lord fulfilled all the promises that he made to Abram and to the other, he repeated the promises to Isaac and Jacob. God fulfilled the promises that he made to the fathers. Good point. Anything else here? Yes.
There's one other passage you might want to put as a footnote, is Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 10. And the Lord your God has multiplied you. Now, the promise that he made was to make them a great nation. How are we giving them the land? To make them a great nation. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and behold, you are to this day as the stars of heaven for multitude. The second promise that God fulfilled in the Old Testament.
So in the Old Testament, the land promise and the great nation. I've read estimates of when the people came out of the land of Egypt, heading to the promised land to possess it, that they numbered conservatively well over 1 million, maybe over 2 million. And so they were a great nation of people. So those two promises were fulfilled in the Old Testament time frame. Really, by the end of the life of Joshua, both of those promises had been fulfilled. A great nation and possess a land. The third promise wasn't fulfilled until the beginning of the New Testament, when Jesus is born and he comes as a Savior to bless all nations of the earth. All right, other thoughts here. Okay, good points. All right, so Abram has to leave Egypt. In fact, he's driven out of Egypt because of this failed deception that he tried to work on Pharaoh. We get into chapter 13, another familiar, boy, there's so many familiar episodes here in these early chapters of Genesis. In Genesis 13, beginning at verse 1, it says, Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And Abraham was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. And so Abraham had been prospering very well, and he was a wealthy man. But verse 5 says, Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. So, some people say this is a good problem to have. They're so rich they got so much they can't stay close together. They got so many herds and flocks. I'm sure pasture land and probably water. Their herds were so great that the herdsmen, not them directly, but the people who managed their herds for them, were contending with each other. Again, probably over good pasture and water. So there was this strife. To settle this, Abraham offers a very gracious and generous solution. Verse 8, this is Genesis 13, verse 8. Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if thou shalt depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the Garden of Eden, like to the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan. And Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Again, these stories are so familiar to us, and a lot of the observations have been frequently made. But Lot's the elder here, right? Lot's the uncle. Abraham is the elder. Abraham is the uncle. Lot is his nephew. All things being considered equal, Abram should have had the choice. As the elder, he should have had the choice. I'm going to go here. Now, you go elsewhere, but I'm taking this part. But Abram did not do that. He offered Lot the choice. You choose. Whatever way you choose to go, I'll go the other way. It's your choice. You make the call. And so Abraham looks really good in that. And that expression there at the end of verse 8, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdsman and thy herdsman, for we be brethren. What a great expression. And that's been referenced many, many times. And it's an attitude that we ought to have. We be brethren. Let there be no strife between us. And so Abram offered a very generous, gracious offer. Whichever way you want to go, you choose. I'll go the other way. So Abram looked really good in this. Lot, not so much. Because Lot, the way this is described here, Lot looks pretty selfish in the matter. He lifted up his eyes and he beheld the plain of Jordan. It was well watered everywhere before the Lord. Well, he's got herds and flocks, right? And a well-watered plain, if you got herds and flocks, you would love to have a well-watered plain for them to graze in. And he saw that and he took it. No argument, there's no contention, no argument from Abram. So he went that way and they separated. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan. Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. but the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. One of the things that I think is to be observed here is Lot made a decision. And, you know, it was not the case that, well, after he made the decision, then the men of Sodom just became corrupt and wicked and evil. They weren't that way before. He was totally taken by surprise that all of this wickedness came up in the city of Sodom. That's not true. It was already known. The reputation of that place had already been established when Lot chose to go there. And of course, the expression, he pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord God exceedingly. In other words, they had a well-established reputation. Now, when we get over into chapter 18, we'll talk more about the sin of the men of Sodom. But so Lot makes a decision. Several things wrong with it. The decision Lot made, first of all, was a selfish decision. He should have honored his uncle, his elder, and given him the first choice. So his decision was selfish on the very surface of it. Secondly, it put him, by making this decision, and it's clear this was a money decision. This was a financial decision. My herds are going to do a lot better down there in that well-watered plain. But in order to take advantage of that, I'm going to have to move me and my family to a place where there's an established reputation for evil and wicked and sin. But he did that. I wonder how many times that mistake has been repeated in this world. I think you probably know, and I probably know, people who have made similar mistaken judgments they based it on a monetary financial consideration. I'm going to do this. So here's a guy, and he's offered a big promotion. His boss calls him in and says, "We want you to take supervisory capacity in such and such a city." You know, well, this guy, and then he gives him the dollar number, and the dollar number is crazy high. We're going to pay you amazing money to go to this place and oversee our operations in this place. The guy, he's seeing the dollar signs. But any analysis at all, there's no church in that city. There's no faithful brethren meeting there. And that city actually has a pretty bad reputation for the kind of immorality that's rampant in there. But he sees the dollar signs, and he goes anyway. And then he reaps the evil fruit. He loses his family because he made a decision based upon dollars instead of on, spiritual values. So I think that mistake has been repeated way too many times, and it seems like Lot did it here. Thoughts or comments, anybody? Josh?
Lot was a righteous man. 2 Peter 2 calls Lot a righteous man.
Yeah.
But he made a bad decision, and then that affected his family, like you said. So to me, it's really scary, actually, to me, because I can be right, and I've got the intention to be right. I make a selfish decision, and now my whole family's going to pay for it eventually.
Yeah, I think that's right. You do. I mean, as you say, Peter says Lot was a righteous man, and so he wasn't personally wicked, but he made a bad choice here, and it had consequences in his family's life. Yeah, good point. Wade?
Yeah, also, I think you can see, you talk about the maturity of Abraham, but I think also that Abraham had placed his trust in God. And so when Abraham says, Lot, you go this way, whatever way you want to go, I'll go the other way. In Abram's mind, it don't matter which way I go. I know God's going to be with me, and I'm trusting in his blessing.
Yeah, I think that's true. You have to believe. Knowing Abraham, you think that was clearly in his thing, but God's already made promises to me. I'm going to be fine, right? And I believe God. I believe his promises. I'm going to be fine. Yeah,
he'd already made those promises too,
Yeah.
so he knew it was going to be fulfilled.
Anybody else? Okay, so in the next chapter, in chapter 14, so Lot is in the region of Sodom. Remember, we've described this plenty of times in the past. Back in those times, this was an era of what we would refer to as city-states. What big geographical areas that comprised countries. It was a city and the immediate region round about that city. And each city had its king. And powerful kings maybe controlled a bigger region round about their city, but there were lots of kings, and they were kings over different little local regions. Okay, so Lot is in Sodom, and there's a battle. A confederation of several kings go against a confederation of other kings, and there's a big battle. The side that the king of Sodom was on lost. And so the other forces overpowered their forces, and they lost. And so what do you do back in those days? What's the purpose of a battle anyway? Well, the purpose of the battle is to get spoil and to get riches. I mean, you went to war because you wanted to capture the wealth of those other people. And so you would take their animals, you would take whatever material wealth existed there, you would take people captive as slaves, but you enriched yourself. The winning king enriched himself by defeating the others and taking what he could get, what was beneficial, profitable to him. And that's the way wars were fought then and for a long time. That's all that happened, back and forth. And so it says here in chapter 14, verse 11, they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And so, you may have noticed it sort of back in chapter 13. Lot pitched his tent toward Sodom, verse 12, 13, 12. But now they took Lot, who dwelt in Sodom. So maybe initially he moved to the outskirts of Sodom. Now he's moved into town. But anyway, when this war is fought, the confederation of kings that included Sodom and Gomorrah, they lost. So their stuff is taken. Their spoil is taken. Their captives are taken. And among the captives taken was Lot. Verse 13, there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew. I think that's the first time we get that word Hebrew in the Old Testament. There came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the land of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Now just talk about Abram being a great man. He has his own army of armed soldiers, over 300 soldiers. That you talk about a great man. He just doesn't have herds and flocks and herdsmen. He's got his own army. Abram is really a great man. So when he finds out what has happened, he takes his army, and he went against those kings, and he was victorious. In verse 16, he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. Abram rescues Lot and the others who had been taken captive. Now so the king of Sodom goes out to meet him and wants to give him a portion of the spoils, and Abraham won't take anything. He won't take any reward personally for it. But here's a real important part of this story. Let's read beginning at verse 18. I'm in chapter 14 at verse 18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all. So, and that is the extent of it. Verses 18, 19, and 20 is the totality of the reference to Melchizedek. He was king of Salem, and he was the priest of the Most High God, a king and a priest. Okay, now the reason why that's significant is because of what we read in the New Testament. You know, we've talked several times about why it's important to study these Old Testament texts. Well, because there's stuff said in the New Testament that you can't grasp if you don't have a working knowledge of some of the things that are told in the Old Testament. And so in the book of Hebrews, the Hebrew writer he expands upon this business about Melchizedek. So look in Hebrews chapter 7, chapter 6, verse 20, Jesus made a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Chapter 7, verse 1, Hebrews 7, 1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the tenth of the spoils. And verily they that are the sons of Levi, who receive the office of priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is of their brethren, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. But he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes of Abraham and blessed him that had the promises. Without contradiction, the less is blessed of the better. And here men that die receive tithes, but there he receiveth them of whom it is written that he liveth. And as I may say, Levi also, which received tithes, paid tithes in Abraham, for he was yet in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. All right, so the priesthood of Jesus. The priesthood of Jesus, the Hebrew writer is arguing that the priesthood of Jesus is greater than the Levitical priesthood. Okay, that's his argument. So he's building a case for the better priesthood of Jesus. Jesus is our high priest. We don't have a Levitical priest. We don't have a high priest after the order of Aaron. Our high priest is Jesus, who is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, right? And so, and the kind of interesting argument that the Hebrew writer is making is actually Levi, the father of the priest in the Old Testament period. Levi himself paid tithes to Melchizedek. He wasn't even born yet. He says, still in the loins of his father. But so Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, and Melchizedek blessed Abraham. The less, Abraham is blessed by the greater Melchizedek. Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. So the Hebrew writer expands on this. We got 3 verses there in our text in the Old Testament. And the Hebrew writer builds this argument based upon those 3 texts. What about the expression about Melchizedek in Hebrews 7, verse 3? Without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth the priest continually. Melchizedek, some kind of mysterious supernatural figure here in our text in Genesis chapter 14? I think probably not. That's not the right slant to put on it. The reason the Hebrew writer could say he's without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, is because it's not recorded for us in the Old Testament account. No place does it say whose Melchizedek's father was. No place does it say where he came from. In other words, when was he born? Who were his parents? When did he die? We don't have that information. And so to that extent, in sort of a figurative way, without beginning or end of days. And so, again, the Hebrew writer's building this big argument on the priesthood of Melchizedek being superior to the Levitical priesthood under Aaron. But it's based upon these three verses here in Genesis 14. Kelly.
Because how could he have been the priest if the establishment of priest wasn't given until Leviticus?
So Kelly's question is, how could he be called a priest of God because the priesthood wasn't established until the law of Moses? I think the answer to that is the Levitical priesthood was established when God gave the law to Moses. But men were serving God before, and God was dealing with the patriarchs of the families. You know, when we study the book of Job, Job made sacrifices for his family. And so many of the patriarchs served as priests for their clans. Clearly Melchizedek was like that. But it wasn't the priesthood that we read about under Moses. It was just the priesthood of a patriarch in his family. Anybody else have a thought on that? All right. So again, kind of, and you might just want to highlight there in chapter 14, those three verses, 18, 19, and 20. That's the totality of the Old Testament reference to Melchizedek. But very important for us when we get to studying the book of Hebrews. All right. So we already mentioned, one of the questions asked was, how is Melchizedek a type of Christ? So, you know, we talk about type and antitype, sort of the shadowy forerunner and the reality. The type is the shadowy forerunner, the antitype is the reality. Melchizedek was a shadowy forerunner of the priesthood of Jesus. Okay, so God appears to Abram again in chapter 15. We won't spend any time there, but we get over to chapter 16. We have the episode where Abraham doesn't have a descendant. He doesn't have a child. Sarah, his wife, is barren. We got a problem here. If my descendants are going to become a great nation of people, seems like I ought to have some descendants. Seems like if I don't have a son, how is my seed going to be continued? How's my lineage going to progress? If I don't have a son, well, we might have a problem going on here, you know. So it says in 16:1, now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and he gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went into Hagar, she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Very often this suggested that Sarai, and probably with Abraham's cooperation here, it's almost like we're going to help God out on this deal. You know, God has made some promises here, and it's just not happening. And so we probably need to step in and kind of help this thing along. And so the solution was suggested for Abraham to take Hagar, Sarai's handmaid, and bear children through her that could be counted as though they were Sarai's and Abram's seed. And so that's what they did. Of course, it backfired. It just immediately backfired. As soon as Hagar knew that she was pregnant, she despised her mistress. And then Sarai, she gets all tore up about this, and she insists that Hagar be cast out. I'm not putting up with this business. You know, get rid of this woman. I can't stand this anymore. And so Abraham allows it. You know, again, we talk about some episodes in the life of Abram that just seem like they're probably not perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. He was 75 when the promise was made.
Yeah.
He's now 90.
Yeah.
15 years has passed. Nothing.
Yeah.
And he's an old man now. And, how's he going to have children?
Yeah.
So,
But You're right, and we can certainly see how you would doubt that this is going to happen. But again, it's lack of faith because the promise has been made, right? Wade?
It also shows us how much influence our wives have on us.
I'm not going there. All right. So Sarai drives Hagar off, and an angel of the Lord finds her. And verse 9, the angel of the Lord said to her, return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hand. The angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shall bear a son, shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So Hagar is pregnant. She's going to have a son. Here's Ishmael. And so, we read more about Ishmael, but this was the beginning of that part of this history of Abraham's family. Thoughts or comments here? We're just all but out of time. So real quickly, as you start into chapter 17, when Abram was 90 years old and 9, now he's 99, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be thou perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and I will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name be any more called Abram, but thy name shall be called Abraham, for a father of many nations I have made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. So God repeats here the nation. Abraham is 99 years old, and the Lord appears to him again, and he repeats the promise that his descendants would become as a great nation. And the name changes his name to Abraham, which literally means a father of nations or a father of multitudes. That hasn't happened yet. And like Wayne said, you could begin to say, I don't know about this promise. How's this going to happen? But God repeats the promise, and of course we will see, of course, that it does come to pass. But the name Abraham, a father of multitudes or a father of many nations, is what his name means. One of the things we remember about the Old Testament is when parents gave names to their children. In this case, God gave the name Abraham. But names had meanings. We don't do that. When we have babies, we pick a name we like, and we name them that, with no understanding at all, typically, of what that name might mean. But it wasn't so in Old Testament times, and names had meanings. And Abraham's name, given by God in this instance, Abraham's name has the meaning of father of many nations. All right, mark your study guide right there. And Lord willing, we'll pick up our discussion there next week. Thanks, everybody.